The Xerxes Prime was a flagship vessel, built for deep space exploration and scientific research. It had endured countless challenges, pirate raids, stellar anomalies, and even the occasional alien uprising, but nothing could have prepared it for the gravitational shockwave that struck it unexpectedly while passing near a collapsing star. The ship, once a proud symbol of the Galactic Confederation's scientific might, was now drifting toward certain destruction. Its core was damaged beyond repair, and in less than an hour, it would explode, sending fragments of debris into the uncharted depths of space. Aboard the vessel was a motley crew of brilliant engineers, scientists, and officers, most of them aliens from species with lifespans measured in centuries, all calm, cool, and calculating under pressure. Except for one. Lieutenant Jonah Briggs, a human technician, had been assigned to the ship at the last minute as part of a diplomatic exchange between Earth and the Confederation. His reputation preceded him. Humans were often considered reckless, emotional, and far too quick to crack jokes in the face of danger. Jonah's sarcastic humor, irreverence toward authority, and penchant for casual dress had only further solidified his reputation as a problem child among the others. As the Xerxes Prime floated helplessly in space, the AI's voice echoed through the corridors announcing the ship's imminent demise. Panic quickly spread among the crew. The Varnak, a race known for their unwavering logic and centuries of combat experience, were visibly shaken. The usually stoic Captain Soren paced back and forth, his sharp angular features betraying his frustration. The science officers huddled in quiet desperation, hoping for a solution, but nothing seemed to work. The core feedback loop was beyond repair by traditional methods, and the ship's power systems were on the brink of total failure. Jonah, however, remained oddly calm. While the rest of the crew scrambled to solve the crisis, he leisurely sipped his coffee, his feet propped up on a table in engineering. He'd been tinkering with ship systems for hours, yet his thoughts were scattered, as though he had all the time in the universe to figure things out. For the others, time was running out. With every passing second, the core's countdown grew more and more dire. One of the Varnak engineers, a towering figure named Tharok, was hunched over a console, his long, multi-jointed fingers desperately typing in commands to stabilize the ship's reactors. His brows furrowed, and sweat dripped from his forehead, a sign of the stress that even a race as ancient and disciplined as the Varnak could not entirely shake. The AI chimed in again. Core breach in 58 minutes. Jonah glanced up from his console and took another slow sip of his coffee. "I don't know why you're all panicking," he said nonchalantly. "You'd think it was a real problem. I mean, you've got 58 minutes, right? Plenty of time to fix a few wires." Tharok shot him a glare, the air of superiority clear in his posture. "This is no time for jokes, human." Jonah smiled, unfazed. "I'm just saying, sometimes the best way to fix a problem is to stop taking it so seriously. Anyway, I'm going to grab a sandwich." He stood up and headed for the mess hall, leaving a trail of confusion in his wake. While the crew continued to work frantically, Jonah's casual attitude made him something of a pariah in their eyes. They were fighting for survival, and here was a human who didn't seem to care at all. Yet in the back of his mind, Jonah was already starting to form a plan, even if it didn't look like it. He just needed a few more minutes, and the rest of the crew had no idea that their unprofessional technician was about to surprise them all. The Xerxes Prime was on the brink of collapse, and the crew had grown increasingly desperate. The countdown clock ticking in the background was a constant reminder that every minute, every second, could be their last. Despite the urgency, Jonah Briggs remained an oddity on the ship. His irreverent demeanor and joking nature seemed entirely out of place in a crisis of this magnitude. While the rest of the crew sweated over impossible equations and impossibly complicated technical jargon, Jonah casually floated between the ship's corridors, picking up a snack here and there, seemingly immune to the panic that was infecting everyone around him. The alien engineers, who had spent centuries perfecting their craft, looked to Jonah's reckless behavior with disdain. They had tried everything. They'd rerouted power to secondary systems. They'd attempted manual overrides. They'd even tried a few experimental methods from their own ancient engineering texts. Yet, nothing worked. The core continued to destabilize. The ship's countdown was ticking down relentlessly. And Jonah, well, he was still wandering around with a sandwich in his hand. At the heart of the ship's main engineering bay, the alien officers had gathered, desperately brainstorming. "We can't afford to waste any more time," said Tharok, his voice gravelly. His multiple jointed limbs were trembling slightly now, a clear sign that the ancient Varnak race was experiencing stress beyond their usual stoic nature. Jonah strolled into the room, flicking crumbs off his jacket, and looked over their shoulders at the various failed attempts to fix the core. "Ah, so it's like that, huh?" he said with a half grin. "Trying everything except the one thing that'll actually work." Captain Soren turned sharply to Jonah. "Do you have a solution, Lieutenant? Or are you just here to make more jokes while we die?" Jonah shrugged, his eyes gleaming with something more than mere amusement. "Well, I mean, you've all been trying things that are, how should I put this? Totally predictable. I'm just thinking outside the box, you know?" One of the junior engineers, a young alien named Ilara, was clearly frustrated. "Outside the box? The core is on the verge of exploding and you're talking about thinking outside the box?" Jonah smiled and waved his hand dismissively. "Listen, I get it. You've all got your fancy alien tech, your centuries of experience, and your planet-side solutions. But there's one thing you don't have me." He sat down casually at one of the consoles, pulling up a schematic of the ship's systems. The officers and engineers exchanged skeptical glances. What was this human going to do now? "I'm not going to pretend I know the science behind this fancy alien reactor core of yours," Jonah continued. "But I do know that sometimes the simplest fixes are the best. When things go wrong, you don't always need to make a perfect solution. You need a quick one. And I've got just the thing." He leaned back, staring up at the ceiling as if pondering something deeply philosophical. "You see, when we humans don't have fancy equipment, we make do with what's around us. Duct tape, string, whatever, you know what I mean?" Ilara raised an eyebrow. "Duct tape? Are you seriously suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting duct tape, okay?" Jonah interrupted with a grin. "I'm suggesting something a little more unconventional." He motioned to the starboard cargo hold where old Earth capacitors were stored. Primitive but reliable tech. Jonah had a hunch that by rerouting power through these outdated components, he could stabilize the core's feedback loop just long enough to buy them time. He turned to Captain Soren. "Give me an hour. I'll need a few things from the cargo hold. You'll thank me later." The captain was about to protest, but Jonah was already on his way out, his confidence exuding a strange kind of reassurance. The crew had no other options left, so reluctantly they agreed. As Jonah walked away, a few crew members exchanged uncertain glances. Could this cocky human truly have a solution? It didn't look like it. But in the back of their minds, they knew that they were out of time. And if Jonah's solution didn't work, there would be nothing left to lose. Jonah had something up his sleeve. They just had to wait and see what it was. The situation on Xerxes Prime had grown critical. Jonah Briggs had, as usual, defied expectations by proposing a plan that seemed far too simple to work. Yet, with the ship's core teetering on the brink of total collapse, there was little left to do but try anything, even if it was suggested by the irreverent human who had been little more than a walking joke up until that point. Jonah's plan was straightforward, but risky. He intended to use outdated Earth capacitors, commonly found in the ship's cargo hold, to reroute the power from the unstable core through non-standard systems. By redirecting the energy flow in a controlled manner, Jonah hoped to bypass the cascade effect of the core's instability long enough to give the ship's emergency systems time to kick in. It was a long shot. There was no telling if the alien-designed ship could even work with human technology, let alone if the capacitors would hold under the immense pressure. Jonah, however, was undeterred. With a few engineers assigned to help him, he began quickly, assembling the necessary components in engineering. His usual nonchalance had faded into quiet determination as he barked out instructions to the crew. Time was no longer a luxury. Every second counted. The countdown clock on the wall ticked down steadily, and the once serene hum of the Xerxes Prime now echoed a constant rhythmic reminder of their impending doom. As Jonah worked, the crew continued to scramble at their consoles, trying desperately to stabilize the ship with every method they knew. Yet the core continued to destabilize, its rapid energy feedback creating rippling waves of electromagnetic interference that made the ship's systems go haywire. Lights flickered. Consoles blinked off and on. The AI, now in full panic mode, repeated warnings every few minutes. Core breach imminent in 15 minutes. Core breach imminent in 10 minutes. Jonah's hands flew across the console, assembling the makeshift circuitry with a precision that belied his casual demeanor. He was completely in his element now, in a way the others had never seen before. He didn't need to know every alien species tech or understand the nuances of intergalactic power systems. What he did know was how to improvise when things were at their worst, and right now things were definitely at their worst. "Jonah, you've got 8 minutes." Captain Soren's voice crackled over the comms, urgency thick in his tone. The ship's alarms blared, signaling that they had less than 10 minutes to live. Jonah's only response was a grin, but it was tight with focus. "I'm almost there." In the final seconds, everything was a blur of motion. Jonah worked as quickly as humanly possible, pulling the capacitor systems into place, linking them to the reactor core, and rerouting energy flows through auxiliary systems that had never been intended for such a critical function. His fingers danced across the panels, each motion precise, each decision informed by a lifetime of making do with less than ideal tools. With every passing second, the ship's countdown grew more ominous. 5 seconds, the AI intoned in, its cold, emotionless voice. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest. He was so close. The capacitors had been connected. The emergency bypass code had been initiated. All that was left was to engage the override. But the power output of the core was so unstable that even a single miscalculation could send the entire ship into a fiery, irreversible explosion. 3 seconds, the AI continued. Jonah's breath was steady. He glanced around briefly at the tense faces of the crew, alien species whose advanced intellects had all failed to come up with a solution. The pressure on his chest was immense, but he ignored it. He reached forward and slammed, his hand down on the final button. 1 second. The core hummed ominously. Then, just as the countdown hit 0, the ship's systems flickered, the power grid stabilized, and the emergency core locks engaged with a soft mechanical hiss. The countdown stopped. The Xerxes Prime was safe. For now. A stunned silence fell over engineering. Jonah stepped back from the console, wiped his hands on his jacket, and let out a relieved sigh. "Well," he said, cracking his trademark grin, "I guess I was right about the duct tape after all." The crew stood frozen, their disbelief thick in the air. The human had just saved them all. The Xerxes Prime floated in space, its systems slowly coming back online as the emergency core stabilization took hold. The countdown clock, which had once seemed like an unstoppable force, had stopped at 0, marking the moment when Jonah Briggs, the human technician, had defied all expectations. The ship was saved, but the reality of the situation hadn't quite sunk in for the crew. It wasn't just the fact that the ship was still intact. It was that Jonah, of all people, had done it. The crew had been preparing for the worst. They'd seen failure after failure, watched as their most advanced techniques and decades of experience came to nothing. Yet when Jonah had stepped in, the impossible happened. The ship was now safe, and their eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The Varnak, who were usually stone-faced and unflappable, were staring at him in stunned silence. Even Captain Soren, whose mind was usually a fortress of cold logic, looked almost perplexed. Jonah, for his part, seemed completely unbothered by the enormity of what he'd just done. He leaned back against the console, a satisfied grin spread across his face, and sighed. "Well, that was fun, right? You guys were all so serious about it, I just had to make it a little more interesting." Captain Soren walked up to him, his usual authoritative air tempered with something else, what could only be described as reluctant admiration. "You realize you just saved this ship, Lieutenant? In fact, you've likely saved the entire crew. as well as critical research that could be vital for the Confederation. His voice softened slightly. I suppose I should thank you. Jonah shrugged nonchalantly. It wasn't that big of a deal. Just a little rerouting, a little improvisation. Besides, you wouldn't believe how often stuff like this happens back home. Just call it a Tuesday. The captain's eyebrow arched. You've had this happen before? Jonah smirked. You'd be amazed what humans can do with some duct tape and a half-eaten sandwich. The crew, still in disbelief, exchanged nervous glances. Could this really be the same human who had cracked jokes even as the ship's core was about to explode? How had he managed to stay so calm in the face of total destruction, while the rest of them scrambled and failed? The answer, they soon realized, was simple. Jonah had done what none of them had been able to do. He had thought outside the box. In the hours that followed, the ship's systems began to return to normal. The crew worked to clear the debris caused by the energy surges, rerouting power and fixing minor issues caused by the sudden shutdown. But all the while, Jonah's casual manner and sardonic humor remained a constant presence. His unexpected solution had defied logic and protocol, and while the engineers were still shaking their heads in disbelief, they couldn't deny the fact that his unconventional methods had worked when everything else had failed. It wasn't long before the higher-ups of the Galactic Confederation were briefed on the incident. Jonah's actions were scrutinized, not just for their unorthodox nature, but for the results they produced. The Confederation officers were initially furious that someone who didn't follow procedure had been allowed to make such crucial decisions. But as they reviewed the data and the effectiveness of Jonah's solution, their tone shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. You saved the Xerxes Prime, and in doing so, uncovered a flaw in our design we never would have considered, the Confederation Admiral reported. In fact, we're already making plans to retrofit our entire fleet with similar safeguards. Jonah, of course, was nonplussed by the praise. Hey, no need to get all serious on me now. I just did what I had to do to keep the ship from blowing up. If it helps, then great. If not, well, I was just doing my job. The Admiral's face softened with a small smile. You'll be assigned to consult on new engineering projects throughout the Confederation. We'd like to learn more about your creativity, Lieutenant. Jonah was about to protest when the Admiral added, and we're increasing your rations of Earth coffee. Jonah grinned. Now that's what I'm talking about. As the meeting ended, the crew turned to him with new respect. Jonah had been an outcast, a misfit, but he had just proven that sometimes it wasn't the most brilliant minds that saved the day. It was the ones who were willing to think differently. The Xerxes Prime had survived because of a human's improvisation, and Jonah's casual attitude had not only saved the ship but had changed the crew's perception of humanity forever. In the end, Jonah's punchline wasn't just a joke. It was the reason the ship didn't explode, and that was something no one would ever forget.